words of wisdom to Ian. I think is that the right
That's
one?
quite a task. We still very well.
You do magic.
Thank you, Johan. Yes, I think what I'm going to talk about just a little bit is some of the links between the, if you like, the early music that we used to dance to, how that came to the fiddle, and then talk about some of the, if you like, the other tradition which developed more in this part of Scotland and perhaps towards the northeast, which is really where the strength of the fiddle tradition comes from in the 18th and 19th century in particular. But just before I do that, I thought a couple of interesting things. Johan's talked about the mouth music. I'm not going to try and pronounce anyway. She talks about the mouth music, but of course the other major influence from the Highlands, the West Highlands in particular, is the pipes. And there's a very clear link between the mouth music and the piping tradition. And I thought I'd just play you an example of a very familiar tune, which comes from the pipes and sits just as well on the fiddle. And there's a very clear link. I'll just play you a few bars of a 2/4 pipe march, which is just the kind of thing which you could dance a Highland Shatish to. And this one is called Donald MacLean's Farewell to Oban. I'll just play you a few bars so you can hear. And the pipes are all about ornamentation. It's a continuous blast of air, and the only way to break that up is with ornamentation. And the same thing applies to the fiddle if you want it to. It's all about lots of little ornaments and twiddles. Every fiddle player will have a different approach to it. My approach is I have no idea what I'm doing, so I don't do the same thing twice. It keeps everyone else guessing. The other link that I thought I'd just draw attention to before we move on, Johan's examples of mouth music and songs were very clear in that Gaelic tradition. But anybody who was here a few minutes ago at the walkthrough, we went through the Sands of Muriel, and that, as I'm sure many of you know, is a song tune called Pinky House, which I've played for many years. I first ever found that in a collection by Robert Bremner in around about the 1740s or so. It's quite an early collection. And song tunes from the English-speaking tradition in Scotland are still very current in a lot of what we dance. I know there are different opinions about whether slow airs or song tunes should be stress based. That's a debate for another day, and with a drink in hand. Well, drink anyway. So, the Sands of Muriel, the tune Pinky House. Which, in my opinion, if we need to play them for dancing, song tunes sit well because they have a flow to them. But that's a particularly pretty example. Okay, I'm going to move on now and talk a little bit about the big fiddle tradition of this area. And I'm sure all of you will know the names Gow and Marshall, William Marshall was. He was one of those annoyingly clever people. He was from the northeast up on Speyside, and I think variously he was the factor to the Dukes of Gordon. He was quite a mathematician, he was a clockmaker, and he also wrote some of the most beautiful strathspeys and jigs and slow airs that are still played today. Do you agree? Absolutely. He's a very, very fine musician. He also wrote in relatively unusual keys. Many of the older tunes, the tunes we regard as traditional, largely because we've forgotten who wrote them, are in the keys of D and A, the keys that sit naturally on the fiddle. Marshall was one of the early experimenters, really, with the flat keys. When challenged on this, I can't remember exactly his words, but I think they were, "I don't write music for bunglers." So he didn't take any prisoners, and some of his material is actually very difficult to play, but very rich in those keys. Anyway, back to the Gowes. They were a family from just south of here, around Dunkeld. There was Neil Gow, the elder, and he had a whole brood of sons particularly, all of whom developed in their own way into quite reputable musicians of their kind. Actually, I'm not sure Scottish musicians are ever reputable, but they probably got as close as we ever get. They played for the big houses. And I think that's one of the most interesting things, actually. We think of all of these tunes which have such wonderful names. We think of them as respectful things. You know, the lady such and such's favourite, Lord something or other's strathspey. And it's only when you start to delve into some of these old collections that you realise that actually it's not respect, it's self-interest and mercenary approach to life, which still works for musicians, actually. All of these volumes. Excuse me. Can somebody get me a glass of water, please? Thank you. I'm sorry.
Make it a bucket. That's gin.
The first time Brian's handed me a glass of water.
Sorry, I promise not to do it again.
Yes, many of these productions of music were perhaps often 36 pages long. And they were expensive collections to put together in their day. And musicians generally, again, I'm expecting a very large vote of sympathy from the floor here, and musicians even back then were not well paid. Worse than that. Some traditions never die, do they? And these musicians were sponsored effectively by the big houses. We're in Athol country here, and the Dukes of Athol, whose seat is up at Blair Athol, they, I guess, saw the richness of what Neil Gow was producing and decided they'd like their name associated with this. And they provided patronage, which I think is slightly different from patronising, but there we are. And a lot of these collections are dedicated to the Dukes of Athol or their brothers or wives or sisters. And in the start of each volume, there's a subscribers list. So the various people who bought the original collections effectively raising the money by buying in advance. And it's when you see that somebody whose name appears attached to a tune may well have bought 10 copies, you can see that actually it was quite a commercial thing that the composers were doing. I thought we'd play a couple of tunes which are quite familiar. One is used for a dance which I'm sure you'll recognise. It's on my list somewhere. Yeah, that's right. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but Muriel and I are going to play Lady Charlotte Campbell's strathspey, and we're going to play it perhaps the way it was originally intended, which is much slower and with much more space, and then we'll take it up to what we regard today as dance tempo. It's still a beautiful tune when played up at dance tempo, but when it's given the space, it's something quite different. We are, of course, speculating rather on how these things were played, but there is a clue in these collections that a lot of tunes that we now regard as dance tunes specifically say slow and less danced. So, the definition of slow or fast is something that's changed over the years anyway, and of course it has over the centuries. But it's quite interesting that they were meant to breathe in a way that they can't necessarily when they're pushed into a very sort of four-square modern dance approach. Anyway, I'm talking far too much, so we're going to just play one more tune. One more tune, and this will be a tune from my other favourite composer. Yeah, is that? William Marshall, excuse me. And this, again, is a tune which has been adopted as a country dance tune. And it is called Mrs. Macpherson Dance Tune, I think. So, in the key of A, here we go. Muriel, who's going to talk a bit about the piano and the precursors of the piano and how that's evolved. So, thank you.